Hello, everyone, and thank you for being so prompt. Once again, I'm Alex Lawrence from 6G World, and I'm here with you late in the afternoon with actually a double header of really exciting topics. So coming up next, we're going to have a look at key value indicators, which I think are potentially one of the most undervalued topics in this whole 6G conversation. And I'll explain why shortly. But then after that, we're going to be holding a 6G surgery. Now, this is something where we're just pulling in questions from the audience, topics that we haven't addressed before. And happily, I've also got some questions from the online audience as well lined up ready so that we can make sure that everybody is involved in this. Now, as far as KVIs go, the key value indicators, going back a couple of years, I was looking into 6G, and these got me really excited. People ask me quite often, what's the difference between 6G and things that came before? And what is different in kind compared to 5G or 4G or so on? And regularly, I make mention of these key value indicators, the idea that we've got something that is driven not just by technology for technology's sake, but something which is there to support societies and the people that live within them. I think that is such a radical change from what we've done before, that is potentially transformative, not just to the industry itself, but how enterprises and customers and governments look at the telecoms industry. And my worry is that if we go about it wrong, this is so new for us that we run the risk of just doing what we've done before and then trying to figure out KVIs at the end and putting them in like window dressing. And I'm really hoping that the conversation that we can have today is part of making sure that this doesn't become a new version of greenwashing. Obviously, this is something that I don't have a lot of control over, but I am very glad to know that we do have people here with influence from a variety of different perspectives. So I'd like to welcome on stage our audience for today. Actually, let's not have the audience for today on stage. Thank you for not rushing me. But let's bring up the panelists at any rate. That's Volker Ziegler, Colin Wilcock, Alexei Helikari, and Ari Potu. Thank you. That's an impressive stage rush there. Thank you.
Hey, Alex.
So just to set the scene, I'm going to go around and give you all the opportunity to explain who you are for those that don't know and why it is that you're engaged with this topic. And then after that, then we can hopefully dive into some of the sort of more pressing questions on this. But Volker, perhaps we can start with you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a historic moment indeed. Why? Because 5 years gone by, 2019 Levy Conference 6G. The journey as regards 6G has started 5-6 years ago at Nokia Bell Labs. And I think indeed, when you reflect on what's truly different, what has the ambition been from the very beginning in terms of how would we want the best possible next standard for next generation of communications in a differentiating manner, powerful, impactful manner, KVI, key value indicators, truly is at the heart of this. And what I think also is remarkable, now going back at history, 4 or 5 years, when we proposed this shortly out of HexaX as a key concept, complementing performance, KPIs, key performance indicators, everybody bought into this. So everybody means both academia, industry, and public sector. And maybe reflecting on one of the comments we heard earlier today, maybe that's also symptomatic of some of the shift we have seen in terms of how much even more powerful cooperation between public and private sector is, right? So companies like Nokia, definitely, we have taken over part of that ambition to be truly value-driven. And now when it comes to 6G, of course, and maybe I can add a couple of more sentences if I may, at Nokia Bell Labs, we framed this very early on in terms of what are the topics, the lead themes, the key drivers of value associated with 6G and beyond technology, beyond performance indicators. So to be clear, what is a performance indicator? Could be throughput, could be latency, could be reliability, you name it. So what are value indicators? What values are we talking about? So broadly, yes, you could cluster this into societal, economic, environmental. Sometimes, by the way, I feel there's maybe too little discussion on the economic side. Maybe we can come back to this. But maybe just highlighting some of the themes as we at Nokia associate with key value drivers, key value indicators. Sustainability, of course, is one. And not just, and Matti, I agree with you, just limited to energy efficiency. There's more aspects to sustainability. Security and trust, privacy, another key area of value indicator, definitely. And last but not least, probably the third one I'd like to highlight is truly digital inclusion. And when I reflect on this day, I think we've had some very good hints at these three from various angles. So increasingly, there's a lot of traction, buy into the concepts, and we can, of course, I look forward to this, discuss more in this panel. What else is needed? How do we make it actionable? Especially at this moment in time, where we're getting close to the foundational release 21 of 6G around the corner.
And now that making it actionable is, I think, hopefully quite a good segue into getting Colin to introduce himself.
Oh, I have to do something. Oh, okay. Good afternoon. My name's Colin Wilcock. Thank you certainly for the people in the audience for staying here and not going skiing. I see some have made that decision, some haven't, but it's good to see at least some have stayed. I'm here really with three hats on, which I appreciate is too many hats, and I apologize for that. I have the pleasure of being the chairman of the board of the 6GIA, which is an industry association that tries to be the voice of European industry on all 6G and 5G issues. And I'm also vice chair of the SNSJU, which we heard about earlier, which is this big European research program looking at 6G. And in both those contexts, we have been championing this idea of KVIs. So we facilitated bringing this idea of KVIs into the IMT 2030 process at ITU, which is defining what 6G will be. We met some resistance, but at least the ideas are already there, and that's something which I'm doing. And many projects within the SNSJU are trying to develop these ideas of KVIs as well as KPIs. And HexaX2 was mentioned, which is one of the primary ones, which is sort of looking into these things. Sure. And when we come back to standardization, we see that 3GPP is going to be starting the 6G story in May with the first SA workshop. And then the 6GIA will be facilitating a European proposal on use cases. And in those use cases descriptions, we will be including those KVIs that we think are relevant. So absolutely an important area, something where we are actioning it in so much as we are funding the research and driving the activities in this area. The last hat touch to mention is ETSI, where I'm vice chair of the board. I thought I ought to mention that, otherwise I'll get hassle when I go to the south of France next time. Okay, there I'm very much involved in linking research with standardization. And that's why this is relevant, because clearly we need this research ideas, this nascent ideas that Volker has been talking about. We need this to feed into standardization. Without that, we have some issues. Maybe not all the KVIs, it's not one-to-one, but it should at least be an issue in standardization. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And, you know, moving sort of through that process then, Alexei, you're working with Spirent, and I'm going to ask you, and then Ari as well, sort of to what extent the involvement of KVIs affects what you're doing or how you're thinking about what comes next.
Yeah. So yeah, my name is Aleksi Helakari, working for Spirent Communications from a test and measurement side. We are working extensively at the 5G networks and deploying and monitoring and testing those. And I think KVIs are going to be a key part of the future networks, how we actually prove the value of what the networks provide to the society. But I think what colleagues mentioned here before is that the KPIs are going to be important for actually demonstrating those values, and how the KPIs need to evolve. Not only measuring the latency or throughput and so on, but rather focusing on the quality of experience. So for example, from a inclusivity perspective as a KVI or key value, how do we actually make sure we have the coverage, but not only the coverage, but a meaningful quality of experience that the people can leverage the connectivity and coverage what is there to utilize the services in a meaningful way. Just giving an example, I was driving here yesterday from my home from Oulu, and I tried to be in a meeting while driving. Of course, my headphones were on, not breaking any laws by speaking and driving, but I tried to be in a meeting, and the challenge was I had the coverage, but I couldn't participate into the meeting because I was dropped continuously from the meeting and so on. So when we develop these and the kind of KVIs and the key values, how do we actually can measure them? What KPIs we need to have? How do we need to correlate those different KPIs together to actually prove the value in the future networks and so on?
Great, thanks. And then sort of Ari, sort of from the 6G flagship and the University of Oulu side, again, when we're talking about these key value indicators, Volker mentioned that there was buy-in from academia, but to what extent is that something which drives what you do, or is it more of a sort of side plate?
That's a very good question. One of the things measured by Aleksi here was that how do you measure a value? That is a very big question, and luckily there is a big SNS KU project coming up into the called the Sustainability Lighthouse, which is hopefully looking at the metrics. How do we actually measure the values, at least somehow, give some indicators? How do we feel in terms of business or in terms of environment or in terms of societal effects, whatever it may have. You asked whether we use that as a starting point in our research. Kind of, yes. We look at remote area connectivities, this digital inclusion. We look at energy efficiency, but that's only one facet of the environmental sustainability. So yes, we try to figure out research projects that actually look at the sustainability issues from one angle or another. But then there is yet another storyline behind the sustainability and these KVIs. These change with time, and they change with where you come from. And for instance, in some countries, use of AI and cameras is quite okay to follow your citizens. In some parts of the world, it's not. And nowadays, for instance, in Finland, we have been seeing a lot of nasty things happening in the electromagnetic spectrum. And I would say that from the societal point of view, for instance, this value indicator of resilience is becoming very interesting from Finnish point of view. I mean, we constantly see GPS jamming in Finnish territory, and that is now becoming a very important part of the storyline. But it's not the same in US because they don't see any GPS jamming at the moment. So yes, we try to look, we are proposing projects that support Europe, but support also our national societal needs and so on. So
Brilliant, thank you. And I should say that during this session, I am going to sort of keep my eyes open on the audience. So if you do have questions or comments at any stage, then please do put up your hand and we'll have people able to share a microphone with you. Having said that, I do have a couple of points. you mentioned already, actually, that, for example, in the case of privacy, that can be something which is fairly controversial and varies from place to place. As an industry, we're very used to doing global technology and getting alignment and all this kind of thing. Are there key value indicators that we can align on? I mean, not just necessarily the values themselves, but I think everybody would say, yeah, let's save the planet, unless they were out to really look bad on public TV. But exactly how to measure that or how to monitor it or who should do it. Is there a chance of finding alignment on that? I'll go to Colin first for this.
I can give my view on this.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make it right. I think there are common KVIs which will be global across the world, but not all of them. So some of them will be, as was said, will be specific. I think one of the large problems in actual fact was again highlighted that we're not quite clear for many of these how the hell you measure them. And so one of the things we need to do is not just identify them, but identify how we will measure them. And it sounds easier saying, well, you must be able to do this. What's the trouble? But maybe this idea of energy efficiency is a classic example where you say, well, surely we can measure energy efficiency. Isn't it just how much power is my base station using here and how much is the core using? And then, yeah, and possibly the handsets, if you want to get complicated, and that's it. Well, no, it isn't. Because the point is, what effect does that have on the overall society? So if we're in 5G and 6G world, increasingly using this technology, not just for classical telecoms, the spotty teenager playing games, but actual other industries like automotive or media or Industry 4.0, then we need to take into account what's the effect on those domains, the so-called handprint. So it's not just the footprint, what the energy we're actually directly using, though, of course, that's something which is perhaps easier to measure and we can do that, but it's the handprint. And that's where, certainly from my side and Smart Network and Services, JU, that's why we're so keen on the project you were talking about, trying to have this sustainability lighthouse, where we have a large enough project that we can take the entire scope there. That it's not just the technology itself, but applying that technology in a number of domains and seeing what effect it has then.
Thanks. And I mean, when we're talking about this, there are some elements like the energy efficiency, where, as you say, we are familiar with the concepts and so on. And there are others to do with, let's say, privacy, where it has been an element of telecoms for a while, although it may be sort of a rather specialized piece. But there are some things like resilience or trust or let's take something maybe a bit more extreme, where we don't have necessarily much in the way of our own experience of that from a telecoms point of view. And Ari, as we're looking towards that, is that where you see academia coming in, where we have like a diversity of experts with different backgrounds, for example, in inclusion and diversity, let's say, who can come in and add their weight and their understanding into, how at least we start to get a grasp on these issues?
Yeah, I would say that this again requires global and common understanding what would be expected from telecom point of view, what are the values that we expect to see and what are the indicators there, both from value and performance point of view. And for instance, in this particular event here, we are taking initiative to start with certain countries in the world to look at what we call a resilience, and start to look at what each party, different parts of the world, what do they think about resilience? What is the common denominator that we can actually agree on resilience? What is that? And that we can then develop further into actions and hopefully eventually into solutions. So yes, there is value in doing things in a global, way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess building on what you just said, Ari, I guess it's about, when you look at research, academia, also industrial scientific research, Nokia Bell Labs, I think our opportunity is to provide options. First of all, options anchored in technology and privacy, trust, security. It's a domain, it's very exciting. When you go back again, 2019, 2020, the way we framed the way forward out of Bell Labs, we said security and privacy and trust is one of the key areas of research, 1 out of 6. And for the right reasons. Why? It starts with all these new application scenarios, immersive telepresence, immersive experience, digital twins, including digital twin of the human, to the degree we want it. And there would be value in this in the medical context. But now coming back to the point, I really want to emphasize. So what's the role of academia when you look at technology side of academia? Research labs such as Bell Labs, I think it's provide options. Options such as homomorphic encryption. Right? What does homomorphic encryption means? It means that like sensor data from the heart sensor, for instance, would be encrypted such that you cannot detect who it is or whose data set that is, but you can still work on the data as if it was the real data, right? Homomorphic encryption. You can use very simple schemes such as multi-party compute, like how you share load between device and edge cloud. What does it mean? It means like not a single edge cloud gets access to the full data set, but only a subset. We can go back to Peter Vedder's keynote earlier today when we said sequential AI, right? What does it mean? It means like you share data, but you don't share the model. So there's a whole range of options now coming up in the device edge continuum, just to highlight that aspect. And then this entails, interestingly, what is public sector and regulator role in this, right? Because where do we need government mandates and where do we not need them? So I guess it's very important role that research has, that we share what the options are, and that then entails for the whole range of governments as we have to make their right choice. But it's not like a choice in terms of making the choice by government mandate. It's rather like being open for the right choices. And we heard DoD representatives speaking earlier this morning about zero trust. It's a good example, right? We don't need government mandate. Like we don't want to see zero trust. No, it's the opposite. We need to have the right tools to deal with that. That's part of the 6G journey as well, right? Just to explain what zero trust really means. What does it mean from a technology angle? It means you monitor all the time, basically. That's what it means de facto, right? We have a solution at Nokia now, even commercially out. It's called the dome, the cyber dome. That's part of the story way forward. So highlighting the value of technology, putting that into the value context, and also how we split the work within government regulator and research/private sector. I think that's part of the discussion.
Excellent.
Maybe just to build on that. So as you mentioned, kind of the 6G, and in the future, more and more monitoring and data is going to be collected and so on. It's going to be important also if we think, for example, network as a sensor. When kind of you start getting more and more data from people and so on, how do we also expose to the communities and enterprises that the privacy is actually there and the security and so on. So it cannot be wrongly utilized, all that data and so on. So building from a KVI perspective to the visibility and openness, and how do we actually make sure we also provide that as part of the 6G, while we still ensure the security and privacy, but provide the needed visibility and access to those key indicators.
And there's actually, I was just, listening to you, and I was suddenly realizing that there are a lot of application providers, their mobile applications. You don't get to use their applications unless you share your data.
Yeah.
You have to actually say consent. And this kind of thinking needs to also change so that the application developers don't require your data in order to you to be able to use their services. So it's also a mental thing. What is a value? It's not just, technology or software. It's also something that you need to change here in terms of entering the market.
And because of these data leaks and so on, and providing all the information to the governments. People are becoming more and more aware of this data and how it's utilized and so on. So it's going to be important in the future to also ensure.
Yep. Now, I'm ever so glad that you mentioned that, because we've touched tangentially on the role of regulators, public sector, and so on in this. And I'm actually hoping that some of the people from the public sector in the audience are going to be able to come back and respond on this as well. But one of my big questions is, how are we going to arrive at the appropriate set of KVIs when there are so many stakeholders? I mean, it's great that we're here talking about this now, but if we are not involving, let's say, the end users or governments or civil society in the setting, and potentially even the monitoring of those KVIs, then there's a risk that we'll miss the target fundamentally. So, you know, to what extent both is there outreach, and to what extent as well are they interested in engaging in that kind of conversation? I guess, Colin, you're probably the right person to lead on that.
I can't believe I'm the right to give these questions myself, but hey, maybe it's just because it's after lunch. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, clearly one of the things we're trying to do with this European research program is try and bring the various stakeholders together. So in actual fact, a lot of what you are saying has a resonance, that we have indeed tried to do this. One of the aspects is trying to work very closely with the various different so-called vertical domains. I say vertical domains in a sort of derogatory sense, because what one has to understand is many of these industrial domains are far larger than telecoms. You know, something like automotive or something like that makes far more money, or far more constituent members than us, and yet we just call them, you know, verticals. But then nonetheless, dealing with these different ecosystems, these different domains, is one of the key ways of trying to pick the right goals for 6G technology. After all, that's what we're talking about, whether we call them KVIs or KPIs. It's something we should be aspiring to achieve with the technology. And going through those different verticals, we also have some access to end users. And from that, I think a vital part is also use cases. Now, this sounds a bit bizarre, and there are different opinions here. You're saying, well, you know, how can you know how you are going to use a technology in 10 years' time? After all, historically, we haven't been very brilliant at this, if I'm going to be personal. Nonetheless, if you take use cases not as the answer, but as a direction, these sort of services, be that, you know, virtual reality or various other stuff, they can be quite complicated as well. If we take that we can at least identify families, potential directions that this new technology will be used, and from those use cases see what would be the relevant KVIs for those use cases, then at least we're a step in the right direction, I feel. Is it 100% right? No, probably not. But at least it's a logical step that we can actually do now. It doesn't mean that we don't need to work with these other communities. We do. But this is the first place we work with them, talking about what their future needs are and where things go.
Thanks. And actually, when we're talking about this, bringing in other industries, again, I'm sort of curious to sort of get that perspective from Volker and Alexei as to what extent that impacts upon your work and impacts upon the direction that you see the industry going in the sense that if we are able to engage with these organizations and set these kinds of fundamental goals, then it feels like maybe that's going to be answering one of the big questions really for the industry, which is, well, what's the point of all of this? And then at least we're starting with the problem that we're trying to solve, and then filling in the technology around that rather than vice versa. So that's quite a shift from a sort of regular way of thinking. So I mean, Volker, maybe you can sort of comment on how you're seeing that play out.
Yeah, indeed. So what I can openly share is when you look at some of the discussions we keep having at Bell Labs, Nokia, we believe it or not, we start from what is the relevant opportunity? What are the customer problems to solve? And to your question, some of the most exciting problem statements you would find in a variety of vertical sectors, industry in particular. Now, I'm, as you know, based out of southern Germany. We have around the corner in Stuttgart, we have Arena 2036. Arena 2036, in case you haven't heard it, it's hosted by University of Stuttgart, but all the industrial companies engage, and some vendors like Nokia, we heavily engage. And what is it about? It's about innovation. Like, how do we optimize productization, sensing, positioning for security purposes? But ultimately, it's also about safety and financial advantage beyond the safety aspects. So value in financial terms. Now, the broader context of this discussion is there also value in terms of going beyond financial, economic? Well, probably yes, because this is the other beauty about 6G. It's general purpose, right? So some of the cool things we do, like automated vehicles, AGVs in the shop floor, you know, Alexi, you talked about driving out from Oulu, and you had a vision, like no more gaps in coverage. But you know what, 6G, the vision would be, you go like this. Car, self-steering, autonomous, and probably maybe not exclusively enabled by 6G, but supported, enabled, right? It's one of the obvious examples. By the way, technology-wise, that's the other interesting point that I heard over to you, Alexi, for your perspective. But I guess from a technology angle, we are fairly advanced when it comes to research, proof of concept. The uptake, like automotive in particular, is sometimes more challenging.
Yeah.
Right, and some people say it's a matter of trust in a different way. ADAS is established and trusted, but probably part of the answer is we would work together and combine like onboard sensors with what some of the roadside unit infrastructure could do. But please, Alexi.
Yeah, I think to your point, so kind of how I see is that these key value indicators, they are going to be key to driving 6G and to, as an industry, for us to prove the value we provide for the society and help justify the investment into 6G. That's how I see it, because currently when we are working with 5G deployments, one of the key challenges is that these KPIs are not necessarily what we can currently measure from the networks, are not actually good enough to show the actual value that it's provided. So if we are successful in defining these KVIs and standardizing them, so we can actually measure them and analyze them from these highly complex multi-vendor networks, we potentially can show the value and justify the investment into these networks, and therefore drive the innovation forward.
Thanks. I mean, when we're looking at that, then we're talking about these key values as both a business opportunity for the industry, but also as a benefit to a wider society. Who should we be looking at to monitor this? Because it seems as though for some of it would be a natural standpoint for government, for example. But then that varies from nation to nation, and that kind of undermines some of this. So if we're looking at as global a technology as possible, then do we need to be considering KVIs in as global a context as possible, and maybe moving it to, I don't know, the ITU, or just, you know, the peasantry around the world?
I think maybe we're seeing contradictions where there aren't any there necessarily. I mean, if you look at the current situation, the currently regulatory framework, there are certain KPIs, things like coverage, which are typically part of a call. And that coverage isn't that members of the government go around with their mobile phone and say, have I got coverage here? Obviously, that's either outsourced to a consultancy or often actually provided by the operators themselves. And I would suggest the KVIs we're talking about would also be something where, if you will, as an industry, hopefully, if we can find a way of measuring them, it is something that it will be in our interests to actually create values and publicize those values, either in terms of part of a regulatory requirement, which would be consistent, or even just to make people informed, because there is a lot of misinformation, this classic misunderstanding between footprint and handprint I mentioned earlier. In other words, just looking at the total watts used by the mobile network and not looking at the total watts saved by the network and not considering that is a classic example where if we had a KVI there that somehow gave the overall picture, the picture for mankind or the picture for Finland or whatever else, that would actually be better for everyone. It would be a true measure. So I think there is, and I think really the fact that we're having a panel about this shows that there is industry in the community and in the in industry to actually look at these values and also find ways of measuring them and providing those measurement values.
I would say that some of the values are national. Let's talk about, for instance, mobile coverage. It's a value by itself. You have coverage here in Lapland, and you actually in Finland, you can go to forest, deep into the forest, and you still get 4G. Now, that happened because of regulations. So, Finnish regulator said that the spectrum licenses are almost for free, but the price comes in how do you deploy your networks. So there are some things that are national, some things that are global, which can be commonly agreed. So there are, games to be played and rules to be made, and sustainability lighthouse again could be one tool to go forward with this kind of thing.
But isn't that the case where the actual metric is the same? It's just applied differently in different countries. So I doubt there's many licenses given, certainly in Europe, where there is some sort of coverage. Yeah. Now the coverage value won't be the same, but the matrix for that coverage probably will be very similar.
Yeah.
No, metrics matter. I agree, Colin. But I think, Ari, I understand the perspective, the point you made. However, I think to a largest degree possible, we should let market decide, right? So even, I mean, there are some good examples where there is market failures and probably some of the rural areas to be covered. It's not financially viable. So in some cases, we need smart vehicles to help fix this, right? But in many cases, there's no market failure, and yet sometimes it seems like we call for the easy answer. Government step in, regulate. The better answer is, let me give you the example of energy consumption. So a lot of folks are not aware, users of mobile services in particular, where is the energy being burned, right? Half of the energy is network, and there the lion's share is radio network, but the other half is device. So that's part of what I think we need to get across. And then, of course, it's also depending on time of day and when people use their phones. On this latter point, it's great to see that there's some operators now, no regulation needed, no government intervention at all, who go like, okay, if I give visibility to my users for certain download purposes, what is the right time of day to download data so as to help optimize energy overall consumption? Consumers do it because folks love it. I do. I would use that service. So here's a good example, right? So whereas, of course, with rural coverage, probably won't work like this. So we need to, but overall, summarizing, market-led to the maximum. And that's true for standards, and it's true for the values associated with 6G as we see it moving forward.
Thanks very much. Now, I'm going to sort of throw a conversation open to the audience shortly, but we've covered off quite a wide variety of things here, and some of them, as you say, I may be just making problems where there aren't any. What I would like to know from each of your perspectives is, where you do see big problems that hopefully, if we're gathered here up on the stage again 5 years from now, we've actually got the answers to. But at the moment, we still have these as as works in progress. And maybe these are calls to action to the audience here and the wider audience online. Harry, maybe I can get you to start.
Problems, 5 years. Well, we have 1,323 kilometers borderline against Russia. There is a big problem. Hence resilience.
Hopefully it's still there.
And hence, self-sustainable base station, it's a part of the resilience, because denial of energy attacks are something that we do not consider at all. But we may have small batteries somewhere in the base station, but sometimes denial of energy could be longer term than we expected. So that's one. Second big problem is this digital inclusion. I mean, almost close to half of people are still not connected to internet. So those are the two big things. And then there was this third one, is this, how the hell do we actually measure the KVIs? So those three ones are the big problems and big things that we need to solve in the next few years, in my opinion. But I come from Finland.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Alexei.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points, but especially how I see is how do we measure this? How do we actually prove the value, and how do we look at this in a way that we are able to actually show the value to everybody and therefore monetize it in the future? So I think if we are able to resolve that issue and get different parts and stakeholders included in defining those, that's going to help us with 6G. If we fail on that, it's going to be the same thing as we are now facing with 5G, is that there are some challenges to justify the investment and show the value that the technology and the networks are bringing to the table. So that would be my take into this.
Fair enough. Thanks. Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree that this measurement of KVIs is clearly an issue where we need resolution. I would also question, is this really a design priority today in the research and development of 6G we're doing? I hope it is. We've seen some indications. I fear that we tend to be, talking as a community, the telecoms community, we tend to be fairly conservative, and we tend to too often look for the solutions of yesterday for the problems of tomorrow. So it is a sea change. I mean, what we're talking about here isn't something, oh, add a few more matrix. It is fundamentally different, that we're saying the matrix we've been using since God knows when, 2G or before that, where we're saying it only really matters how much throughput am I getting? What's the maximum data rate? But perhaps jitter is important, perhaps latency is important, but really that says it all. And those are the things I market on, and that's what I'm judged on. And we're talking about, well, yes, those are KPIs, but in actual fact, they're not necessarily vital. It's actually far more esoteric values, actually user experience, for example, or resilience, or things like this, that we should judge, that we should actually make technological decisions based on those values, not just peak data rate. And that's a fundamental change. And I don't know if in 6G we'll be successful changing that mindset quickly enough.
Just to build on that, I think you're absolutely right that we need to look at new different KPIs and how do we combine those and cross-correlate and analyze utilizing AI and all of that to actually show the quality of experience or security or whatever it is, and how do we leverage those? With the old metrics, it's not going to fly.
Thanks. And okay.
Yes, so key question really is, how do we make the vision of 6G value real? How do we turn this into reality? And maybe the one or two aspects I would add is skills and educational outreach. Skills and educational outreach, right? Very fundamental. So training people within ICT, our sector, but also beyond. And when I say beyond, verticals, but society at large, the younger generation, Generation C, and making sure, this probably is the right way to wrap up the session, making sure that the next generation, everybody understands that what we do has the potential to deliver value to society. And I think that's the opportunity we have. And as we move forward, hopefully we will jointly deliver proof points. So as to actually make it happen, from medical to automotive, to industry, to digital inclusion in the Finnish north and protecting the Finnish border.
That's excellent. And I think that ties in to more questions that we could have and more issues around, how we attract skills into the industry and how we position telecoms itself. Maybe, through the use of KVIs in a convincing way, it can make, the next generation of telecoms what, for example, Google was when it first came out. This idea of, doing no harm, that could be really exciting. But I don't want to restrain the audience much longer now. So I'm going to, I see a few hands up, but I also see a hand with a microphone in it. So I'm going to hand over to Dean here.
Microphone, which is, it's on. I'm quite tempted to suggest that we should be having, AI-based metrics or generative metrics. Or intent-based metrics where you can query the network for what you want to know rather than the standardized metrics. But a specific one that I think would be aligned with KVIs is around energy usage. Is it possible to have an energy estimation function, and even better, an API for that? Because developers are going to need to know how much energy their applications use as part of their own Scope 3 emissions calculations. And so if I'm Netflix, I would love to be able to have an estimation of how many joules or whatever a given movie might cost over 6G, 5G, Wi-Fi, and in 4K, 8K, HD. Can I have an API for it?
Finally, we have one project where we try to look at this problem from, various aspects of energy consumption. And first of all, you think, okay, it's easy. Just put an energy meter to each and every device that you have. But it turns out it's not that easy. You have these multi-core computers and servers, and each of them are running like hundreds of processes, and you should identify which process is using HK and which one is using 4K video and how much it is using energy. You can get some kind of an idea, and we are looking at how to, let's say, distinguish between these different processes running on these servers and how to tell how much a certain application is using energy. When it comes to G-Node Bs and some other parts of the network, it's rather doable. And we have a setup together with our partner VTT in Oulu, where we are measuring things in the network. But this open RAN, open, server plates used for bringing up or building these networks has introduced a new problem in terms of energy measurements.
And it's not, clearly, it's an exact flip side of this sort of virtualized world and cloud world we live in, where, we're trying to get more effective usage of our resources by sharing, basically. Scaling and sharing. Well, the downside of that is then for a specific process or activity, which will have many process or many tasks distributed across, well, depends on the time of the day and the direction of the wind, various different machines from one end to the other. To try and link that all up together is very tricky. It's not saying it's impossible to do. One thing that we will face, though, is obviously the sort of internet way of doing things, which is do it quick and dirty and make it fast. And obviously that doesn't lend itself very well to instrumentalization and finding precise values from various things. But
at Nokia Bell Labs, we have it's more than a vision in the meantime. It's actually getting close to a prototype. It's what we call UNext. And actually, it's all about exposure. It's about API. It's about providing transparency and insight associated, if you like, for the network architects in the room with network and cloud OS integrated, right? And therefore putting developers in charge or users in charge. That's absolutely part of the paradigm. Your question could have been misinterpreted, like you suggested, dynamically adjusted frameworks of performance. Even that is conceivable, but I guess on some of the values we should stay the course. There's also a risk if you start, too dynamically adjusting what is valuable, what not. Even though if society feels like that, we do deal with it. And that is, by the way, part of the educational challenge. Take diversity as an example, right? There is a lot of evidence to suggest it is valuable, and yet at this time, in many countries, we face backlash. So what can we do? Well, it's about, again, educational opportunity, making sure people understand what the value is associated with some of the values that we as a company at Nokia believe in, and I would argue Western society at large believes in, including human values and right of free speech. Especially.
Now, there are a few more hands raised. I'm going to go to Miko next, and then I'm aware that you've got a question as well. And then I'll keep my eyes out on this side of the room a bit more, just in case. Sorry, Miko.
Yeah, Mikko Ostalo, Nokia Bell Lab. So my question is about the KVIs. How do you see them more from the perspective of European, non-European geography?
Okay, I'd better put that to.
Okay, so that's well, we have basically three ways of looking at this issue. One is the American way, which is totally industry-driven. I mean, I was referring to it already earlier when I said that there are certain companies that only allow usage of their applications if you accept to give them your data.
Yes.
Then there is a European way, which is more citizen-oriented, where we have GDPR and a trustworthy AI kind of things, and then we have some of the nation-state-run businesses somewhere towards east, which have yet another view on this. So I would say that there is business-oriented look, then there is the citizen-oriented, and then there's a nation-state-oriented look at this. And each of these have different values. The business values are more important in towards West than the societal values, however you define them, are more interested towards the eastern part of the world. And here in Europe, we look at the issue from a citizen value point of view, more likely.
Thanks. And sorry, I don't know who you are.
Tatu Koljonen, Aalto University. So these KVIs were new for me, and but I have a buy-in here because of course, if we claim that the 6G is a transformative societal transformative technology, then we need to have those. But if we were building a Ferrari, of course, we would have the horsepowers and such. But why don't you use these United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are economic, economic, environmental, cultural, and you have even the pin there. So, and they probably have all the measures there that you are looking for. Well,
unfortunately not.
Unfortunately not. No. So the idea is wonderful, sir, and certainly that's actually a starting place for a lot of what you got on. I would think 75% of all the project proposals coming into SNSJU start with these as the justification for what they're doing. So absolutely important, absolutely a starting place, but they tend to be fairly broad and fairly general. They are excellent set. This is why I wear it. I absolutely believe what they're trying to do. But unfortunately, KVIs, we have to become considerably more specific, something to measure. And that's actually far more tricky.
And sorry, Volker, were you going?
Well, I was just looking at Ari because to your point, 5 years back, we did a joint piece of research. It started with 6G drivers of value and UN SDGs. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I've got to say that was a really interesting question because
that was one more from Gerhard.
Yeah. The Sustainable Development Goals, I was with the GSMA when they first started trying to track the performance of the mobile industry against them and became the first industry to do so. And just watching from the sidelines, it was fascinating insofar as at a very senior level, all the CEOs and board members of these operator groups were absolutely on board with this. And and yet it seems as though a few layers down, these didn't actually sort of start to impact upon the KPIs of the individuals involved in actually running the companies. And so the kind of delivery against the sustainable development goals, therefore, started to become more of a showpiece to keep the boss happy, rather than anything else. And this is, I think, sort of one of the issues here is how do we make sure that it doesn't repeat that kind of a cycle, and whether that is picking up on the SDGs to do so and implementing them in a better way, or finding a different route, I think is really critical. But sorry, I'm interrupting, Gerhard. Your question.
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe this should be flipped a little bit. Maybe we should be talking about what I'll call key value controls instead of key value indicators. And I'm thinking along the lines of something that's not easy at the end of the day, but maybe more straightforward, shutting things down, right? If you have a newer car and it's on a gas engine, you come up to the stoplight, it turns itself off. And the data is out there to be able to monitor and shut things down. And I know that's part of what the network's being done now, but there's got to be other things that can be controlled using the data from the network, using the data, the metadata from the users that moves us towards the goals of 6G. I'm just wondering if there's other thoughts on that.
Typically, control algorithms have a equation that it is trying to, fulfill. So indicator. But then nowadays we are now going into the era of artificial intelligence, which might be one of the answers to your control question, that we can give kind of a boundary areas where you should be able to operate. And then the AI will take care of it. But typically control is based on equation, threshold values, and so indicators.
Yeah, we are getting almost into a debate. Where do you need AI and where not? There are some problem statements where, algorithmic mathematical approach is superior to AI. But I guess the true question is, I think, Colin, you made such a comment earlier, it's all about the objectives, right? And objectives tied to values. And then discussing how do we measure these and what are the best ways to actually implement, execute, even control, even though there's a negative ring to control. Remember, we had actually, it's good news, this has slowly disappeared, but there was some not so democratic stakeholders who went like, yeah, we need central control for the internet. This, fortunately, it was an architectural debate, has in the meantime been mitigated. So that's what I meant earlier. We need to stand up for the values we stand for as individuals, as citizens, as companies. And if there are some bad ideas that then link to technology choice accordingly, we need to fight these. Just to be clear, I think it's not easy going all the way, and we will have a lot more battles come up. But I think it's worthwhile speaking up for what we believe in, and then beyond technology.
Fantastic. Now, there's only a couple more minutes of this session. So for those who are going to be taking part in the panel fielding a whole variety of different questions in the 6G surgery next, I'd maybe encourage you to go and grab a microphone from the AV desk. But in the interim, I'd be very keen to get your possibly closing thoughts, unless we have any more questions from the audience. And this is to do with how you think KVIs can be used in the most transformational way. So as you're saying, if it's not just tinkering at the edges, if we really are able to make a sea change there, then does that have ramifications for example, how the kinds of companies that telcos become, let's say, or other areas in terms of society? And yeah, what would you like to see as those big implications if we can get this right? Yeah, I'll go with you first, Volker, on that.
I think the starting point is how do we get it right? It depends clearly on sharing appropriate level of insight as to, again, framing the debate in the right fashion. What are the values that we truly try to achieve? It ties into measures of objectivizing the output, metrics. It ties into then technology enablers, AI in particular, platform enablers, cloud and network going hand in hand, by the way, also transcending what is telco today. I think that's part of what we're discussing here, while leveraging the things we are good at, also from a technology angle. Now, this is a European event hosted in a remote place called Levi, Finland. So I think maybe also make this point, it's appropriate to leverage the strengths we have. Maybe that's also something I would like to highlight, right? And some people have argued, well, we need to copy the more long-term strategic thinking from not so democratic countries. I'm not so sure about that. So let's leverage the strengths we've got in the technology sense, in the governance sense. Market-driven is part of it, but at the same time, making sure we keep social values not just in mind, but we see these as a key driver as well. And societal risks as we progress into the 30s have increased. So we have a role to play, right? We have a purpose at Nokia. It's very simple. It says we create technology to help the world act together. We create technology to help the world act together. And that's, I think, very true and needed and going forward.
Thanks. Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly the hope or the potential I see is that this KVIs is changing the whole premise of what we think a good mobile network will be. Well, let's call it connectivity. How we judge connectivity. As I said earlier, trying to get away from just peak data rate to something broader. And the hope is if we can achieve that and if we can follow that guidance, then some of those KVIs can open up the possibility of trying to do even more good for society. And for me, the way that leads is if we are going in that direction, if we are building technological systems, technological ecosystems, which are not purely based on profit. If we are trying to build things which truly make people's lives better, not necessarily making them money, but making their lives better, then we need to perhaps start looking also in terms of business models and funding and things like that. Is if this is a societal good, if this can demonstrably improve people's lives, then we perhaps need to think also about how we actually deploy, how things are funded, what the things are going there. I think that's a very exciting way of looking at it when we start looking at a communications network, not just as something for a specific group of companies to make money from, but more as a broader infrastructure for the good of society. I think that's exciting. It's not easy, and there are many pitfalls here, as we've seen when you try and do this sort of combination of societal and profit making. Clearly, there still needs to be a place for commercial networks, but maybe we could go beyond that.
Fantastic, thanks. Alexei.
Yeah, so I agree with that, but kind of from my perspective also, if we are successful with these KVIs, and we are able to demonstrate the value we bring through the new APIs and so on, maybe we can capture a little bit of that monetization also for the telco industry from the enterprises and so on. So I think it's a multifaceted thing and helps us just to prove our value as an industry, both to the society as well as the customers and so on.
Great, thanks. And last word from you then, Ari.
All right, thanks. Well, societal, business and environmental, right? Well, the one thing that's happening in environmental area is the energy consumption and how to reduce that. That's obviously very important. What is still missing is the recycling of all these thingies that we have, these side flows kind of thingies. Those can be developed further. But Then we go into the business, the monetization, new models, new business models. Fine, that's good. And I agree because it's all about digital inclusion. So how do we make countries where they don't have good mobile networks actually have them? And then that brings into the governments of those countries and maybe cooperatives of people and whatever kind of things that you can bring in there. But it's all about digital inclusion. Second thing in societal, I already mentioned it many times, is the resilience. So how to make these things work with severe environments, that's it. Business, monetization, societal reliance and digital inclusion, and then environmental recycling and energy efficiency. I guess those are the big issues.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I'd love to go on further, but I am aware that there is another session between us and drinks this evening. So I think we better hand over to this and make sure that we're that step closer. But thanks very much for your time on this. Big round.